Hi, everyone, it's Dr. Z, and welcome to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. Today's episode, we're talking about sex. We are talking about sex and the narcissist. And we have our special guest today, who I just adore, Dr. Kate Balestrieri. Dr. Kate Balestrieri is a licensed psychologist, certified sex therapist, sex addiction therapist, pact therapist, and founder of Modern Intimacy, which I highly recommend you follow. It's a group therapy practice in Los Angeles, Miami, New York City, Denver, and Chicago. She is the host of the Get Naked with Dr. Kate podcast. Follow her on TikTok and Instagram at Dr. Kate Balestrieri. I am so excited to have her with us today. She is just a wealth of information on how narcissistic personality disorder changes sexual relationships. And she gives a really good in-depth look at how sex is used by the narcissist to gain power and control, and also strategies for the person who is in this relationship in terms of how to keep yourself safe, how to get out of the relationship, and really what to do in the moment if you find yourself in this situation. I hope you enjoy this episode. It's extremely helpful, and I think you're going to get a lot out of this. Welcome to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. Today we have one of my faves. Kate, I am so happy that you are here. We have such amazing things to talk about and things that, in my opinion, are not spoken about enough for numerous reasons. So today we are talking about sex. We are talking about sexual behaviors, and we're talking about sexual behaviors in the context of narcissistic personality disorder. So I'm just going to get right into it. Talk to me a little bit first about sexual behaviors in general, and maybe how that's different in relationships with someone who is experiencing narcissistic abuse versus a non-narcissistic abusive relationship, because it looks different and it means something different.
Yeah, it absolutely can. Well, first, thank you for having me on your show. I love
Yes.
listening, and I'm excited to talk with you about this. So in a narcissistically abusive relationship, sex can become a tool of weaponry, right? A tool of control. It becomes bait. It becomes a way to keep someone suctioned into the relationship. It provides a false sense of security. And it can be a bomb that's used to perpetuate the cycle of abuse, right? We go through all the different stages of abuse in a narcissistically abusive relationship. And in the honeymoon phase, when you make up after sex, it can provide a lot of calming and regulating to someone's nervous system after there's been a period of abuse or apprehension or anxiety. So it can be a really gnarly tool of weaponry, and the person who is being abused might often mistake sex as an indicator of connection, love, all of the things that we're told to link with sexual behavior. But for somebody who's organized in a narcissistic fashion, sex has a very different ecological purpose for them. And it's rarely about the sexual pleasure and more about what sex allows them to engender in the relationship.
I love the way that you said that. And this is exactly why I'm having you talk about this, because I don't think anyone could have said that better. So so for people that are listening that are either in an abusive relationship or just don't even know that this exists in this manner. So as a way to kind of, I like to say preventative medicine in a sense. Explain to people what it is that a narcissist gets from having sex. For people, let's say, that are not in that narcissistic realm, we have sex for a whole bunch of different reasons, but rarely are they with the motive of gaining power necessarily in a toxic situation. Explain it in terms of how it's used as a weapon, like you said, and what
Yeah.
they get from that.
I like to think about sex for somebody who's narcissistically organized as one of the tools in their toolbox to prop up their sense of self. And when we understand narcissism, we understand that it's really about the person who's organized in this fashion being able to prop up a sense of self that they can feel okay about. Because really, narcissism at its core is around shame and self loathing, right? But narcissists cope with that through the projection of various images that they manufacture. So sex becomes another tool that they use to prop up that image to themselves and or to the world. So sex can be a way that they gain supply and attention, validation, control, power. It can be a way that they go and prove to the world, see, look at all of the sex that I can have with all of these different people. Aren't I great? Aren't I powerful? Aren't I meaningful? And so it really becomes, again, this tool of holding together a very fragmented sense of self under the surface.
Yes, I completely agree. And we see this, we had talked about financial abuse in a prior episode. And it's the same, it's a different vehicle, but it's the same function, I like to say. It's a way to kind of, as you said, prop your sense of self up. It's a way to see, look what I have. It's for validation, it's supply. I think one of the biggest differences, though, is that, I have plenty of patients that I see where their partner has gambled their money away, or has hidden money from them, or has not allowed them access to their finances and uses that as a way to control them and keep them stuck. I think one of the main differences, though, with using sex as a vehicle versus finances, let's say, is that while they both involve two people, one can feel way more violating than the other. So would you say that there is a specific reason, and maybe there's not, maybe it's just what they have access to, but would you say there's a specific reason, let's say somebody would use sex to gain that supply and that control and that power versus, let's say, another vehicle?
Yeah, for sure. I think we have to take a step back for a second, though, and first look at the way that sex is used as currency in our culture. And so a lot of why someone might go to sex as a vehicle to prop themselves up can be explained by how we as a culture value people or don't value people based on their relationship with sex and their number of sexual partners. And I'm not saying that it's right to do that, by the way. It's gross that we do have
Sure.
that sort of existing in our zeitgeist.
But it exists, and yeah,
it is a reality.
yeah.
So for a lot of men, they are conditioned into masculinity through a couple of mandates, right? They are told they have to be without emotion and objective. They're told they have to make a lot of money and be professionally successful. And they're told they have to be sexually virile and competent, right? And what that often means is getting to a yes sexually with a lot of partners. And a lot of women are told they are supposed to be desirable for sex, but also that they're supposed to hold back on quote unquote giving away their sexuality. So for a lot of people who are organized in this fashion, sex becomes it becomes a vehicle to worthiness as well. Am I man enough, or am I a good girl? Right. And so the way that sex becomes weaponized in people's understanding of their own gender and their presentation of gender to the world plays a big role in why they might go to sex as a tool to prop themselves up, especially for male narcissists, because they are really conditioned around proving their masculinity over and over again. So for a narcissistic man who's already got a fragmented sense of self, sex might be something that he has more access to, whereas making money might be more challenging for him. So, he might be able to manipulate someone into being sexual with them, but he can't necessarily manipulate his way into getting $1 million paycheck. So, it's a different and sometimes more readily available tool.
Yes, I would completely agree with that. Absolutely. And I love that you make that distinction. And to be honest, I think, when I speak to people who are in these situations, there's, like I said, there's many ways that they've been controlled in this relationship. But because, and you had said this in the beginning, because in the early stages of these relationships with love bombing, they never really associated sex with manipulation or power. They associated the verbal abuse or the physical abuse, but they never associated the sex. And so when this person wants to be intimate, or I shouldn't even say it's sexual with this person, that dopamine's released and all the feel-good chemicals are released, because that's where they can go back to what was initially comforting to them. And I think it's why a lot of times people don't look at sex in relationships as something that's manipulative. And it's really jarring to me when I hear this, and I'm sure you hear this too. I have so many women that will talk about their sexual experiences with their partner who is likely, has narcissistic personality disorder. And it never occurred to them that they were having sex against their will, which is where it gets very, I want to say sneaky, because I don't think people realize being taken advantage of sexually doesn't necessarily have to be physically forcible. It could be, I'm not going to give you your car keys back to get to work on time and you'll get fired unless you have sex with me right now. I mean, I hear things like that all the time. Or doing things sexually they don't want to do, but they don't say no because maybe they felt like it yesterday, but they don't today. And having that ability to say to their partner, yeah, I know I did this yesterday, but today, for whatever reason, I don't want to and I'm not comfortable. And in a healthy relationship, maybe they're disappointed, but there's no coercion and there's no making them feel guilty on purpose or using it in such a way. And so can you talk a little bit about how, because I don't think this is spoken enough about, I think it's kept very quiet. One, because I don't think people realize it's considered abuse. And two, I think they're ashamed and they feel guilty. But can you talk to people listening about how and why that things that don't look like abuse in that nature can very well be?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're bringing up sexual coercion, because I do think that a lot of what we hear about sexual abuse or sexual assault omits the insidiousness of sexual coercion, because sexual coercion is really subtle often. And it often, to your point, does not include physical force, but it does include this sort of like bartering, this transactional demanding. I won't give you this until you do this with me. Or if you won't be sexual with me in the way that I like, I'll go somewhere else and get it. So there are, often veiled threats, often not even veiled threats that happen. But one of the most insidious forms of coercion is the pouting and the withdrawing that can happen.
I was just going to say that. That silent and that emotional withholding.
Yeah. And it's not to say that anyone is entitled to sex with another person's body, because we're not. But narcissistically organized folks don't really care about what you want, because their capacity to mentalize, meaning their capacity to understand what's going on inside your internal experience, is very limited. They really don't see other people as autonomous, subjectively unique human beings. They see them as an object that exists in extension of themselves, right? So they don't really care whether or not you want to have sex. They expect that you're going to want to do what they want to do and want to please them. And that's one of the things about narcissistically organized folks. The sex that they're having is often either transactional or it's very objectifying. And so it can be really confusing, because they're good at putting the romantic schmooze on top of the sex when they want something. But also, oxytocin is a gift and a curse in this situation, because it's a beautiful neurochemical that gives us the feeling of bonding and trusting, and it actually obliterates cortisol in the body. So one of the things that's so confusing about sex with someone who's narcissistically abusive is you might be walking on eggshells all the time in your relationship, except when you're having sex, because that skin to skin contact creates that oxytocin release. And just for a few moments, you're like, wow, this feels great.
Yes.
We feel so
Yes.
connected, but you're just high on
Yes.
oxytocin. I hate to break it to
Yes.
you. Yeah.
I mean, that's beautifully said and could not be more
Mm.
accurate. And I think it helps people to hear it from the biological and the chemical standpoint, to know that it's not their fault, and that
Right.
because something feels good doesn't simultaneously mean or equate to you liking it. And that's a really
Right.
difficult concept for people to grasp. We see this a lot with people who are,
Yeah.
who have histories of sexual abuse, even as children. And there's this
Mm.
guilt that they live with, that it felt good. And at the same time, it was coerced and it was against my will, and it hurt at the same time that it felt good. And it's
Yeah.
extremely confusing.
It can be. I'm so glad you brought that up. That's called arousal nonconcordance. And it's really common when people are being exploited sexually. And Emily Nagoski puts it really beautifully in her book, Come As You Are. She talks about how when we're hungry, food is food, right?
Yeah.
And we want to eat to satiate hunger. And so, in a similar way, like our genitals don't differentiate different kinds of stimulation. When the genitals are stimulated, they often respond with arousal, right? Even if the mind is screaming, no, 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 no,
That's
no, no, no,
fascinating.
I don't want this, right? And so it can be
Yeah.
really confusing. And a lot of survivors can feel really betrayed in their bodies. Like, why did my body respond this way when I didn't want to be sexual with this person or be sexual in this way? It can be really confusing. And
I
narcissists
just got
will
the
use that
chills.
against you.
Yeah, I even just hearing you say that gives me
Mm.
it's just a very
Yeah.
uncomfortable feeling. Um,
Yeah.
and also along those lines, if you could speak to, um, I've had many patients also who, in those situations, sex will hurt for them. And
Hmm. Hmm.
not because anything necessarily, again, it's that coercive, that insidious coercion where it's not being physically, it doesn't appear to be physically, violent in nature, but it is.
Forceful. Sure.
And,
Yeah.
and, you know, it's almost as if their body, their genitals, every ounce of their being is literally rejecting this person. And even after let's say they're out of the relationship, and,
Mhm.
they engage in sex, in future relationships, it's physically painful for them, even
Mhm.
though there may not be anything structurally or physically wrong, which is where medical gaslighting comes in for women, which is a whole other topic of conversation. But can you talk about why it would be that somebody's body would physically reject in those situations?
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I want to preface this by saying there isn't a right or a wrong or even a consistent way that people's bodies respond to trauma. So if you're someone who has experienced pleasure during a traumatic situation, that doesn't mean anything. It still means you said no, and it
Correct.
still means you didn't want this. And for folks who experience pain either during or after a situation that was traumatic or a relationship that was traumatic, it's again not right or wrong, good or bad. Your body is giving you a different message about what is safe and what feels unsafe for you. And very frequently when we are holding trauma in our bodies, we can somatically sort of brace for that trauma, right? And that often can take shape in the pelvic floor and the way we hold our bodies. So the pelvic floor can become hypertonic or hypotonic, and that can often that can often translate into pain during penetration. So sometimes it's related to that. Um, and sometimes it's not related to any physiological dysfunction or concern. And it is really the mind saying, hell no, I don't feel safe. So I'm shutting all pleasure sensors down. And then what you're left with is pain, and it can be really uncomfortable. But there are a lot of exercises that sex therapists can walk people through to help them come back into their body and feel safe again.
I love that. I love that because
Mm.
that's such a common thing that I hear, and
Mm.
it's such a shame that something like that, something so
Mm.
natural would be something that's so traumatic and actually feels physically bad. Um,
Mm. Yeah.
So let me ask you this then. Why, I want to hear it in your words because you'll explain this beautifully. Why is it that many, I'll say men in this case, but women as well, but I'm just going to say men in this specific case. I'll have many of my female patients tell me how the sex they had with their partner, their narcissistic partner, was the best sex they have ever had in their entire life. Even after the relationship's over, they will still say it is the best sex they have ever had in their entire lives. Why is that? And how could that be?
So the narcissistically organized person, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One, they're likely to be a little bit more disinhibited. They're not as governed by the rules of social conventions, so they might be open to more kinds of sexual pleasure that that can be interesting. But I think what is perhaps more important is that folks who are narcissistically organized are being sexual, remember, to boost their own sense of self. So for a lot of people in who are narcissistic, they want to be the best at giving pleasure because then it means
Yes.
they're the best in their minds, right? They
Yes.
get gold stars in their identity if they are known as being an incredible lover. Um, so a lot of them are really great, and it's they're either practiced and or they're very good at intuitively understanding what each partner wants because again they're manipulating the situation so that you want them, and so they're going to be more generous in their lovemaking or in their sexual behavior with you because they want you to want them and they want you to pine for them and they want you to go tell your friends that they're the best sex you ever had.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's probably very unconscious, but it really does hold a lot of weight for them when they get to know that that title is a title they hold.
Yes. And that is
Mhm.
something that confuses so many people,
Yeah.
how this relationship can be so destructive, but yet the sex is just unbelievable. Again, it's that
Hmm.
dichotomy. It makes it extremely confusing, which is yet another reason that is not talked about as to why people can't just leave.
Yeah.
Super
Yeah.
confusing.
Well,
Um,
and sex is a great bypass for problems. And
yes.
I'm saying that facetiously, right? It's a dangerous bypass, but we can fuck our way out of reality very quickly. And
Yes.
narcissists know that, right? It's a
Love you.
distraction
I love
technique.
you. Yes. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
100% true. And listen, it's not, that's true for anybody. It's
Anybody.
not right. It's yeah, it's true for anybody.
Mhm.
But yes, 100%, absolutely. So let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about the compulsive nature of sexual behavior,
Mhm.
and why it is that it is a compulsion. Why is it that it's, rarely, and when I say rarely, I mean rarely, have I come across working with a patient who has been in a relationship with somebody who is narcissistic where there was not infidelity. And
Mhm.
I mean, rarely.
Yeah.
Even, and I don't mean they had an affair in the context of they met somebody outside of the marriage because there was something lacking and they went outside the marriage and they fell in love with this person, or they went outside the marriage and they're not in love with the other person, but they're not getting what they need. So why
Mhm.
is it that with this group, it's something that is such a compulsion? There are so many partners, so many types of partners in so many contexts. Why is that a thing?
Yeah. Well, I think this is going to get a little nuanced because it's not the same answer necessarily for everyone, but
We like
for a lot
nuances.
of
Yes.
for a lot
We're
of folks who
psychologists.
are yeah, we live in the gray. Um, a lot of folks who are narcissistically organized, we have to remember that narcissism is a condition of objectification, right? When you have a fragmented sense of self, you objectify everyone in your life. Everyone serves a purpose to bolster you up. So for somebody who is partnered with someone, their partner serves a particular function, right? One of the key elements of objectification is instrumentality. Or, yeah, instrumentality. Am I saying that word right? I think so. Is this the person becomes an object or an instrument for the purpose of serving the narcissist in this case. So the partner serves a specific purpose, but so do all of the affair partners or the extra relational partners, right? They all become objects that, again, shore up a sense of self. So the narcissist is really governed by a sense of entitlement. What's good for me doesn't apply to you, and what is rules for you doesn't apply to me. So they often get a sense of power and a sense of esteem by getting away with things, having secrets that can be very intoxicating for somebody who needs to bolster their sense of self. And having lots of supply in different places really, really holds them up as well. So when they're not getting what they want in one area, they're going to go to another object and another object and another object to fulfill that need. But the other thing to think about is from an emotional regulation perspective, a lot of folks get compulsive in their sexual behavior because they feel distressed in some way, and sex is one of their go-to coping strategies. So
as a release,
and this can happen.
You mean?
Yeah. And people who are narcissistic can do this too, right? They might feel a sense of shame, or they might feel helplessness or powerless in some context. And that's intolerable for them because don't we know who they are? They're not supposed to feel that way.
That's
So
right.
they go to sex, or they go to porn, or they go to something else, in large part because for many men, that's how they've been conditioned to regulate their emotions, to go to women. So for a lot of them, it becomes an extension of patriarchal conditioning that is exacerbated by their narcissistic needs.
I love that. I love that. So let's talk a little bit about porn and how that plays into these types of relationships, because we see a lot of compulsion in that regard as well. And what I see too is the significant other will almost justify that in a way because it's not, let's say, quote, actual cheating. And I hear this all the time. And I know, again, there is no correct answer for this. All relationships have different rules and different boundaries and what's allowed and what's not allowed. I find that in these relationships, though, it's almost used as an excuse and a mask to hide the infidelity outside of the relationship. Well, if you're not giving me what I want when I want it, I'm going to watch porn. And so then the partner becomes fixated on that rather than the outside stuff, and almost takes on the responsibility, even for the infidelity outside the marriage. The narcissist does such a phenomenal job of making the person feel guilty. I had somebody the other day who showed me a message that their significant other had sent to them saying, if you're not, and it was so, and I do this all day, every day. And I still, when I see these things, my stomach turns. It was, if you're not going to satisfy my needs when I want and how I want, I'm going to go elsewhere. And that's something you're going to have to live with because you're incapable of giving me what I want. And it was almost as if like the pornography they watched just wasn't doing it anymore for them. And that's their partner's fault. So now they're going outside. So can you talk a little bit about how porn is used in that respect, and the guilt that they put on their partner, in a sense, for not satisfying, that they're the reason why they're doing this?
Yeah. People who make those kinds of claims against their partner are really trying to not take accountability for their own emotions. And so externalizing blame onto their partner gives them the illusion of being objective and not being at fault for things in their lives. And it's interesting, porn doesn't have any demands of you. Porn doesn't tell you you're a good or a bad lover. Porn doesn't ask you for money. Porn doesn't demand that you spend more time with your kids. Porn is just there for you. So it's the perfect supply for a lot of folks who are narcissistically organized, especially if they
I
tend
never
to
looked
fall
at it
in
like
the more.
that.
Yeah. especially
Yeah.
for narcissists who are more on that covert or vulnerable narcissist
Yeah.
side, right? Because they don't have that grandiosity that sort of charms people socially. So porn is an easier object to go to. And
Yes.
many will weaponize it in their relationship. For the folks who are engaged with porn and extra relational partners, it can be a double whammy, to guilt their partner into showing up differently or performing differently for them or with them. But often, those folks are really compartmentalized and they don't even see a problem with what they're doing.
Right.
It's sometimes even less about trying to get their partner to do something, but it's more about you're my partner and I've almost desexualized you in many instances, especially if there is a high adherence to ambivalent sexism. That underlying Madonna whore complex means that they'll objectify their wives emotionally and
Mm-hmm.
relationally, right? They turn their wife into a mommy who's supposed to be a supply in that way. And then they go and they're sexual with all these other people or with porn because,
Interesting.
yeah, they really need like different kinds of relational
Uh-huh.
supply. And so it can be really
Mm-hmm.
mixed. Again, there's a lot of nuance. But one thing I want to say is that with any kind of compulsive behavior, whether we're talking about sex, porn, substances, food, compulsivity and narcissism look a lot alike, right?
Mm.
So when
Can you
somebody's in
explain
the
that a little more?
throes
Yeah.
yeah, when someone's in the throes of an addiction, they're really organized around just like keeping and maintaining their addiction. So anyone who's been partnered with an alcoholic, for example, or somebody who has a gambling addiction, like the world just kind of doesn't exist to that person. Nothing
Yes.
really exists to that person except their addiction. So it looks really similar to narcissism. And when folks go into recovery, they often will become less egocentric and more,
Yes.
relationally focused. So a lot of
Yes.
those indicators that would maybe look like narcissism disappear. So
Mm-hmm.
when somebody's
Mm-hmm.
compulsive with anything, I'm really hesitant to label it as narcissism or not until they've been sober for
Agree.
at least a year. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that. I'll get that question a lot where, is
Yeah.
my partner, narcissistic, or do they have narcissistic personality disorder? And, they're because let's say, like you said, they have a substance abuse disorder. And so I always tell them,
Hmm.
if those, as you said, egocentric behaviors, if those same functions and patterns that look very similar on the surface to narcissism, if they, with a significant period of sobriety, whatever the addiction is, if they
Hmm.
dissipate in time, and I say in time because these are long-standing patterns, even though it may have been
Long.
caused by the addiction, these are still patterns that are ingrained in your brain, and the pathways have been
Hmm.
set up for a long time. So even if they're sober, those patterns may still be there, which may still look narcissistic. So I love that you said for kind of this sober an extended period of time, because
Hmm.
you need those neural pathways to reset. And they
Yeah.
will be capable and able and willing to accept
Hmm.
accountability and willing to change because they don't want to hurt the people in their circle. They don't want to hurt the people they care
Right.
about. Whereas with a narcissist, if they, let's say, quote, get help for their alcohol problem or their drug addiction or whatever the
Mm.
case may be, those longstanding patterns are not going to go anywhere unless they pretend
Yeah.
that they're not there. And I think that's
Right.
the key difference. And so I completely agree with
Yes.
you on that those compulsions have different functions for both. I agree with that. And
Yeah.
I love that,
Yeah.
you said that their world is focused on maintaining
Mhm.
their addiction versus
Right.
someone who's a narcissist where it's focused on supply, period, end of story, however
Right.
they get that.
Yeah. I mean, we could conceptualize narcissism as an addiction to supply, right? It's almost like an
Absolutely.
addiction to objectification, right? How many objects can I
Absolutely.
collect who will tell me I'm great? Yeah.
Yes. I say narcissists, they don't make connections, they have collections.
Yes.
There's no connections, right?
It is. Yeah.
um,
No, it's so true.
So for people listening who are hearing you and saying, oh my God, yes, this is my life. She nailed it. That's exactly what's happening. And then the next question is, okay, what do I do with this information?
Yeah.
What would you tell them?
That's a hard question. Everyone has their own thresholds for other people's behavior. So I think one of the first things to do is really assess one, safety and your resources, and how are you getting through life, and what are your options. And for a lot of people, staying is the safest and the best option. And so that's okay. That's a valid choice. And for a lot of other people, they have different options, different resources, and they might make a decision to take some space. It doesn't have to be, a binary choice either. A lot of folks can start going to therapy and addressing their side of the street and thinking about how they can show up with different boundaries, different communication strategies, different methods of interacting with this person who they may love and who they may feel is a good parent, and they don't want to leave and they don't want to disrupt things. So I think you've got to really take some time and get clear on kind of what you want your life to look like and what you feel capable to do to make that happen.
So, Kate, anything before we end this amazing discussion, anything that you want to add that, maybe the people listening would find beneficial?
Yeah, well, I think I've already mentioned that it's not your fault, right? And it's easy for people to point fingers and blame when either they don't understand or they're ready to, or they're trying to deny sort of their own awareness of a situation that they may have been through. So let's see, what else? I would say just find community, get support, make sure that you are talking with people who really do care and who understand your own agency in finding a resolution to whatever your dynamic is right now at home.
I love that. And this isn't just you saying that or me saying that, but the research shows time and time again that the biggest predictor of any type of success in terms of your mental health or your health in general and well-being is social support. So if you don't have it immediately at your fingertips, find a support group online, use social media, make sure it's coming from a, licensed mental health professional who understands, but we cannot stress enough the importance of social support.
Absolutely.
So Kate, where can people find you and your amazing resources, and where can they get in touch with you if they need to?
Yeah, thanks. Probably my website is the best place, modernintimacy.com, and on TikTok and Instagram at Dr. Kate Balestrieri, and on YouTube at Modern Intimacy.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this amazing discussion. It was so needed, so important, and you're going to help a ton of people. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you. We'll speak soon.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. I hope you found it useful, but most importantly, I hope you found it validating. Want to work one-on-one with me? Visit my website at drjamiezuckerman.com to book a personalized coaching session, and be sure to check out my on-demand workshops on topics like co-parenting with a narcissist, life after leaving, anxiety management strategies, and more. Again, that's drjamiezuckerman.com. You'll also find links to my interactive workbooks, merchandise, resources, and newsletter sign up. Next Up Narcissism is as much your podcast as it is mine. I want to hear your feedback and what you want to hear. So make sure to leave a podcast review wherever you listen, or send an email to nextup@drjamiezuckerman.com. Again, that's nextup@drjamiezuckerman.com. Be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to tune in next week to see what's up next on Next Up Narcissism.